Hello, viewers. Today I will be talking about terrorism and its role in our modern society, and especially how we can be involved in putting an end to it and becoming more aware global citizens. So it's a heavy topic, but I think it's something we need to talk about and need to bring to the center of our national conversation. And so I will get started. So I broke up the contents of what I'm going to be discussing into 7 categories, and so it will all be stemming off of terrorism in the modern day and what it looks like and how we can take action to resolve some of the issues that continue to stem out of that. I'll discuss the different groups that take part in what we're seeing mostly and the different types of terrorism, which is something that I didn't know going into my research, that there were so many different ways that it can be manifest, and that we really need to be just aware and cautious because it truly is insidious, like I said in my first slide, and takes action in many ways that we don't truly understand, I don't think, in our society, and especially in the younger generation. So first I wanted to discuss our part, because everything I say will come back to this, because truly there's no point in awareness if we don't have opportunities for action, and that just takes constant looking and research. I left a couple of examples here. There are actually some online petitions you can sign if you feel like the action being taken by our government is not strong enough, or it's really just a platform to put your opinion about that kind of thing. And then especially on the technological side of things, cyber terrorism has become huge and has a very specific characteristic to it. So just by looking out for that, you can be an engaged and helpful global citizen. And so here to define terrorism a little bit, it's essentially the use of violence and intimidation with the pursuit of political aims. But then you get to that how question, and it becomes a lot more complicated. Obviously, I have that diagram up top that shows the many different ways it can be manifest. And that's one of the things that makes terrorism so difficult to fight and to define, is because it's never the same. And 2 acts of terrorism can occur within the same day and look completely different and affect different demographics. And so here I explain how the different types of terrorism can be manifest. And many of these I had never heard of. So state terrorism is what we're going to think about when we, essentially the major terrorist attacks that we've seen, especially thinking about like 9/11 or the Pulse attack in Florida, and things like that, where it's organized terror against the state, or against the United States in this case. But these other forms like bioterrorism, narcoterrorism, cyber terrorism, ecoterrorism are things that I just feel like there's lacking awareness to what they are and how they function. And so you take ecoterrorism or bioterrorism, like attacks on the environment or just like life, but it's really scary, and it can have a mass effect on our population. And so it's things we need to become aware of. Some of the causes, it's really hard to pinpoint, which is why it's become such a hot topic occasionally in our political gossip, or whatever you want to call that, because a lot of people point fingers at different areas, and no one can deny that the religious ideology of like Islamic jihad has taken the forefront of terrorism in our era, but there are a lot more causes than that, and it's much more complicated than people think, I believe. So some of that, I mentioned Islamic jihad. 207 acts of terror have been claimed by jihadists just since 2010. And that statistic was really shocking to me because I feel like we don't hear about a lot of the smaller acts of terror, and especially when they're taking place on foreign soil. We just have our kind of American bubble that we stay isolated in. And another huge part of terrorism is the group psychology, where an individual is way less likely to scheme a plan and go forth with that than a group. And so you see these young boys abducted and taken into terrorism, taught the ways, not given food or water, any form of sustenance, unless they kill or pledge their allegiance to jihad. And it's just a psychological attack that leads to this huge problem. So in a lot of ways it's religious, but in a lot of ways it's this almost cult-like attack by taking these young boys hostage. And here are a couple of groups that have been majorly active in the past few years. And a statistic that struck me was that 1 to 5 sizable new groups are formed each year, especially in Syria and a couple of places in Africa. There are some hot spots where just because of socioeconomic issues, there is just a huge movement toward forming these, which is really unfortunate. Here are some of the current efforts that are being seen take place. You have the USA Patriot Act, which occurs in airports. So that's something that we have all taken part in if you've flown on a plane since 9/11. I hadn't heard of the Posse Comitatus Act, but it's a similar act where you're losing some sort of freedom just to support that force of trying to put an end to terrorism. And then the human rights movement, which is put into place by the UN. Yeah. So here's my bibliography. Thank you for listening today. And if you ever have an opportunity to take a stand against terrorism, always just put that on the forefront of your mind, and have a great day.